All right. Okay, so it looks like everyone's connected. Good morning, y'all. Thank you so much for joining us on this very lovely afternoon in Providence. Welcome to CSREA's What I Am Thinking About Now series. A core component of what we do here at CSREA is supporting faculty and advanced graduate students in the development of cutting edge and collaborative intellectual work. And this series is meant to provide an informal, generative space to test ideas in recently published works and works in progress. So we're very excited to host this presentation from CSREA's visiting faculty fellow, Dr. DaMaris Hill, who joins us from her post as professor of creative writing, English, and African American studies at the University of Kentucky. Dr. Hill is a poet, a creative scholar whose unique approach makes use of 21st century digital archives to study and uplift the legacy of Black women creative scholars, culminating in award-winning works that expand publishing boundaries and faithfully represent complex experiences. So excited to have her here this semester. And after her presentation, which is entitled Making a Blood Bible and Literary Practice in the 21st Century, Dr. Hill will open up for questions, feedback, and general discussions. Feel free to type your questions in the chat as we go if you think of something and want to get it out, but we'll open for a more comprehensive Q&A after the presentation. So thank you so much, DaMaris, Dr. Hill, for being here. Take it away. We're excited to hear from you.
Thank you so much, Ellie. That was a very generous and thoughtful introduction. I have not heard my work talked about in that way. So it was touching. Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to check in. I just want to inform everyone up front that I did change the title of my talk. I thought it would be better fitting to talk about some of the work that I am engaging in this very moment right now, utilizing the archives here. As always, I will begin with the work. This book project that I am calling A Blood Bible opens with a prologue entitled Inventions. It reads, I write, I feel, I know. I write, I feel, I know. I write, I feel, I know. I write within a stone's throw of the Great Salt Cove, some way south of Seekonk River, who runs as fast as anyone I can remember. I know it like the sweat forming on my skin. I am plagued with visions, born with something like a call that clings moist on my face. I see in the dark and across centuries. I am not othered. I'm sort of inside out. A begging hand cannot hold water or ink. And likewise are the limits of geography. Maps in the palms of my hands float, right before the colors run and the oceans claim them. I feel I cannot tell you what is owned. Every contract is ink pressed upon a mesh of tree pulp and water. If it is expensive, the paper calls for cotton. This weighs on me. I am a writer. I cannot escape some truths. Everything is a living thing that demands space and desires community. I intend to tell you an origin story, one that begins with home and takes the shape of mossy knolls, but the story refuses land and seeks refuge in the waters. Begin here. I do not know what can be owned. I do not know what shore to call home. What I know is that it snows in the ocean. Not icy, the snow is a dense and fluid atmosphere made mostly of life or what is left of it. The snow in the ocean is not cold. It is sun-kissed leftovers of the living and light. It is held together by something sweet, a mucus I pretend is love. It is snowing somewhere, always in the ocean, and it takes weeks to find the seafloor. By the time the snow gets there, it has bloomed in the skeletons of Africans anchored in water graves. I write, My pen is erect and prickly as an urchin. I write. I swallow water and I feel like a cannibal. I know my body is at least 60% water. The clay parts of me be more silt than flesh. Ask the blood-soaked timber of a ship's belly. The sails of ships do not collect the sounds of the sun. So what belongs where, and who can own land? Anyone who has ever tried to tame the swamps of the early colonies know that land rights be a fluid fiction. Anything you claim in this part of the world will be swallowed in the whale's way, whole. The earth is 71% water. The rest is molten dust and clay. I want to tell you more, and ink puddles in my mouth. My flesh and bone are cushioned in waters. My organs, a mesh of mucus and blood. Behind my eyes, hide a chest full of wet words and memories, a treasure. It is a sift of the spaces I was formed in. I wade all at once in these moments. My skeleton is made of mangroves, my tongue licking the salt of every shore. So that is part of the opening prologue of the new work. Portions of this work were previously published as formed in the English literary lit journal, Early American Literature. So thank you for allowing me to open with portions of the work. I would like to offer gratitude and thanks. First, I would like to thank Dr. Tricia Rose and Dr. Stephanie LaRue and the Center for the Study of Race and Ethnicity in America for sharing their home and research community with me. It's been a pleasure to get to know this community and to call people friends. I'm ever grateful to Dr. Tony Bogues for prompting me to explore the treasure of archival holdings at the John Carter Brown Library. I would like to express my gratitude to all of the amazing people and student workers employed by the Brown University Libraries. They have been friendly and extremely helpful. I would like to thank Dr. Keisha Blaine, Chair Noliwe Rooks, and Dr. Kevin Kwashi for encouraging me to pursue this project at this very moment when much of the national sentiment seeks to erase the specific details of our collective being. I would also like to thank Chair Matthew Shinoda. He has been very generous, allowing me to get to know and enjoy the literary arts community here at Brown. The revised title of this talk is Making a Blood Bible and Literary Practice in the 21st Century. I am DaMaris Hill, a CSREA visiting faculty fellow and professor of creative writing, English, and African American studies. In this presentation, I will read from work that has been taking shape here in Rhode Island and is evolving in this very moment. The book project is entitled Blood Bible in American History. This work will be a kind of memoir, an archive made of history and memory. In this book, I'm writing about home, the journeys toward wisdom, returning, and resurrections. I want to also state that this Blood Bible is a midrash. In the sacred traditions of griot and some metaphysical poets, this book is a deeper telling of what you think you know. It is a portrait and an artifact made of me and others. In this book, I will be exploring how we are formed in ideas of home and in kind, how empires in our contemporary moments continue to bevel these concepts of home. In this book, as in most of my work, I am cradling specters, haints, and ghosts. I began this talk reading from the prologue, Inventions. This prologue is an extension, again, of my previous work published in early American literature. I will transition into a discussion about the muses of archives and the hauntings in my work, particularly perspectives considering critical fabulation and Black feminist ontology. This talk will conclude with a brief reading from the first chapter of Blood Bible in American History, a chapter entitled Home, and we will end this discussion with questions, speculations, and maybe some answers will follow. This book is a meditation on home, making, and a reflection on a Black girl/woman life in the context of New World knowing and hauntings. I use the term haunts here in a very literal way. Some of the chapters of this Blood Bible, like many of my poems, are types of eulogies meant to encourage something that is unsettled to speak its peace and rest. I also use the term haunts figuratively to speak of the nostalgia and traumas associated with living as a Black girl and woman in America. America, a place that tries to make you forget that you are a human being so that you can be transformed into something, maybe like a technology, and mark your body as an exploitative site of production for the use of more socially dominant others. These others are so skilled at the arts of domination. They do everything in their power to cultivate an environment where you, Black girl, Black woman, can be convinced that subordination and exploitation are your social calling or a norm, and the only way to be in this place called America. As a poet and an interdisciplinary creative scholar, my work is profoundly informed and rooted in a Black feminist critical tradition. Theories from creative scholars such as Saidiya Hartman's critical fabulation, Toni Morrison's rememory, and Deborah Willis's insights regarding envisioning the Black body are essential technologies within my creative making and knowledge-making process. As a result, my projects are research-intensive narratives that explore the experiences of Black women in American culture and beyond. Dr. Rose, in Longing to Tell, reminds us that how silences are broken is as important as breaking them. Therefore, the appropriation of digital material, like archives in my work, is one of the ways I sample the dissonance of nationhood and stake claim to history, and what contextualizes us more than history, what traps us more irredeemably. In light of history, archival photos are an essential part of my compositional practices. Knowing the violences of the historical, medical, and anthropological exploitation, Black women are particularly aware of the power of archival photos to act as a type of visual ethnography, biography, some westernized pseudo-logic, and proof. Creative scholar Deborah Willis says that art that reclaims archival photos as a type of proof is a way to wrestle the Black body back from the grip of visual empiricism, where it has often been used by more socially powerful others, observing it for evidence of deviance and difference. As a poet and an interdisciplinary scholar, remix is one of the best ways to articulate rememory and recontextualize what we know of America. Methodologies such as critical fabulation pair well with my aesthetic practices like remix. Employing these methods, my writing echoes the tensions between national public histories and multiple truths rooted in specific intersectional identities. Creative scholar Dr. Meta Dawah Jones in The Muse is the Music finds that writing that employs remix acts as a type of performance, a multi-dimensional process that is aesthetic, political, and historical. Therefore, my writing is an intentional rehearsal of a historical process. In my writing, I play excessively with time and with temporal moments. In close comparison with one another, I create a type of tension. I sample digital materials such as archives and use cross-cutting techniques to create cultural grooves. These grooves act like patterns for the reader to follow and immerse themselves within the work. This tension I evoke is intentional because I want the writer to feel as they read. Be clear, I'm not simply seeking empathy from my readers. I want the reader to feel the tension of what it is like to wear a raced, a gendered, or a marked body in an antagonistic society. Remix aesthetics are also useful when contextualizing what Derrida referred to as ontologies, hypersensory performance, and intentionally triggering the effects of individual and socially constructed traumas. In an effort to better articulate the specificity of what my writing is engaged in, I turned to scholar Dr. Vivian Selahana and her theories concerning Black feminist ontology. In the article, Black Feminist Ontology, Rememory and the Ghost of Abolition, Selahana reminds us that Black feminist ontology is the haunt of unfinished business. And this unfinished business is the result of oppression. Ghosts remain because justice is not achieved. The unfinished nature of abolitionism and resistance will continue to produce inaccurate renditions of the social world until anti-Blackness is exercised. Blood Bible, Chapter 1, Home. It opens with an epigraph from James Baldwin. Perhaps home is not a place, but simply an irrevocable condition. James Baldwin, Giovanni's Room. Chapter 1, Home. I told you in breath better spent that I was born again and again. Why begin with an early birth? I begin with the work, my birth as a writer. It is in 2008 that I am abandoning my home in Baltimore to an inexperienced realtor, and I am building a life out of pages. I do not have normal. I am not that kind of person, not that kind of woman. I do not have a hope chest full of keepsakes to take with me into my husband's home. At this point in my life, I do not want marriage. My son is a teenager. I am a younger woman. I am fool enough to believe I can save myself by letting go of my mementos along the run. I am fleeing a life that no longer fits me. I am saving nothing, banking on dreams. I want to write. I am headed west, not east. I am not reading the invisible ink of the pamphlet I am holding. It is from a bank. I am looking into lines of credit and home equity. In 2008, my home is valued $200,000 or more above my mortgage. I believe that there must be a mathematical formula to turn some unmortgaged home value into something that looks like my American dream. The first step in this dream includes selling my home, my 1890s Victorian brownstone, and using the cash equivalent of that home to buy a smaller home in the middle of America. I'm a younger woman. a Black woman, a single mother in America. Therefore, I am familiar with work and more familiar with fatigue. I think there will be enough money left over from fictional equity to fund my first year of my writing career. If you will not bid me rest, dear America, allow me to live my dreams. This is my dream, to be a writer, not a starving artist. This dream is simple as new math. The dream is built from false equations and financial fictions. This home equity pamphlet says the banks suggest that if I have wings, I need wind to form my desires. This means the home equity pamphlet convinces me that the problem is, even if I have the technology to dream, that I also need sufficient financing to build on the dreams I already have. The bank pamphlet has proposed buying a home equity loan. They say this loan is like borrowing from myself, and I roll my eyes. I see the skeletal frames of my ancestors floating in dollar bills around the bank. I blink. And then the banker is showing me an interest rate for a loan for money he says is sort of mine already. He laughs uncomfortably and nods vigorously as he assures me that I need this money, but the money is mine for the dreams that already belong to me. I leave the bank and put my house on the market in June of 2008. In July of 2008, the housing market bursts. The market crashes, and all of my dreams and solutions turn into ticker tape disasters in Times Square and dark headlines. My dreams are crackling between my ears. The heat of them is brushing against my neck in the summer breezes. I do not turn around. I do not look back. I am a church child. I have heard of Lot's wife. I have been warned, never turn around. In 2008, there is a July, an August, a September, an October, and a November. In July, my realtor phones me sometimes 3 times a week to tell me that buyers are coming to view the house. She tells me that I only need one buyer and that this sale should be easy. In July, the potential buyers love the house, but choose cheaper foreclosed homes to purchase. There are plenty to choose from in Maryland, in America. The people with the credit and the mortgage approvals view 3 or 4 houses a day. They can mortgage 3 houses for the price that my house is listed. Not many return for a second look. No one negotiates on the price. In August, not one potential buyer has put a contract on my house, and I am gaining weight. I am treating myself to cheap desserts from a fast food chain. This 4,000 calorie plus dessert will not dissipate my debt. Everything I touch is paper. Everywhere I look, I am blinded by delinquent notices and what the banks say I owe. The path to $200,000 in home equity is littered with threats of foreclosure. I lower my sales price so that it hovers just $50,000 above my mortgage. I convince myself that if I'm frugal, I can make my dream stand on that. It is October. My mother's birthday is in October. She spends the born day grieving. She is long divorced. She is living in her sister's home. She lived in my home before she moved back to Bermuda. In this phone call meant to celebrate her birthday, my mother offers to make a mortgage payment for me, and I accept. She loves my home, the lingering aroma of respectability. that a Victorian home like this one I'm about to lose carries? Can respectability and social mobility be mortgaged in the United States? If so, how and how much? Give me a figure. What is the cost of social mobility in the context of intersectional legacies of slavery and inequity? What is the cost of social mobility in the context of mass incarceration in the prison industrial complex, vining and straining every brick of every building in Baltimore, in America? And is there a variable calculation that factors in all the gains that were lost in the war on drugs? It's Halloween 2008. I am haunted by these questions. At night, the Haints watch over me, counting rings of debts, gripping at my throat. By the first week of November, everything is cold and congested. I am gaining weight rapidly. My cortisol production produces more fat than the candy I stuff in my ice cream. I desperately need a warm coat. The temperature is dropping. My house in Baltimore is sitting in the cold. I will need to turn the heat on. I shiver at the thought. It costs about $900 a month to heat a house that size in Baltimore. In Baltimore, in an old Victorian home with the winter ringing, it is easy to burst a water pipe and flood a home, flood a neighborhood. With that level of damage, I will never acquire a buyer. I have the heat turned on just in case a buyer comes to view my empty home. This means I have new debts accumulating on windowsills and arriving in the mail. No one visits or views my home in November. My son is in high school and I am in graduate school. The university's policy stated that we support students, not families. I was a graduate student paying living expenses for our small family in Kansas and a whale of a mortgage in Baltimore as I waited for home equity to cash out. There is a July, there is an August, a September, an October, and a November in 2008. In 2008, I am a graduate student, a mother, a writer, a near starving artist that is losing a home that maybe I can never really afford. I am not enjoying the $200,000 in home equity that existed in June of 2008. It is November when I realize I cannot reach for my life as a writer and hold down my nearly $300,000 mortgage on a house that appraised for $496,000 in Baltimore. I make the hard decision to stop paying for my mortgage that I can no longer afford, even at the risk of an additional $272,000 of debt. I decide to use my meager salary and whatever student loan money I can acquire to feed and provide for my small family. I am puzzled by my circumstances. I am a younger woman, a smart woman by any measure, trying to figure out where I went wrong. I followed the formula, the options presented to me, but I don't know all the facts. These facts like, by September of 2008, the average US housing prices had declined by over 20% from their mid-2006 peak. This is not directly in this portion of the essay, but 2006 is when I decided to return to graduate school. In March of 2008, 8.8 million people borrowed money for mortgages and 10.8% of homeowners had negative equity in their homes. By November of 2008, 12 million people are living in homes and saddling negative equity along with inflated utility prices. 2 years later, in September 2010, I learned that 23% of US homes are worth less than the mortgage on them. I do not know any of this in November of 2008. The dust of the American dream in the housing markets hasn't settled yet. Visibility is relative to proximity. I think that I am alone in an economic storm. I'm using all of my scruples, trying to survive an unplanned poverty. I am working as hard as I have ever worked, earning $13,500 a year. That annual salary does not cover my small family's basic needs or my $2,800 a month mortgage and utility payment on an empty house in Baltimore, in America. Student loans of varying types and sliding rates are presented to me. They are daunting solutions. I have no other options. I rotate paying my monthly utilities in the same way I spent my girlhood playing red light, green light, waiting for some arbitrary authority to catch me trying to get ahead without permission. I was never good at that game. I cash out multiple retirement accounts and any other savings to cover several months of mortgage payments on a house I don't live in. Being poor is the most expensive activity in America. It may cost you your life. This book is not a bootstrap narrative or a rags to riches story. It is a midrash, a telling of something we think we know of America. Poverty in America is a reality that impacts every American. It is a public health threat to those that are not wealthy. A good friend in Kansas, Mr. Robert Reed, told me that in America, most people lose 3 kinds of fortunes. He said it's been that way since Thomas Jefferson. Mr. Reed and I understand that Thomas Jefferson made his first fortune by marrying a very wealthy woman. We know that he made subsequent fortunes by selling people she owned and mortgaging the children he created with Sally Hemings. Mr. Reed and I know intimately that Thomas Jefferson is the man that shaped our new world economy. We can read it in the palms of our hands, feel his choices racing in our veins. At these moments in my history, when I have been chronically poor in my life, various creditors have created stories about what I individually owed. In 2012, invisible financiers, people that have benefited from the historical inequities, determined that I didn't have $200,000 in home equity, and that in fact, I was about $500,000 in debt. This debt included an unpaid mortgage, student loans, and excavated retirement accounts. I searched for the traces of the housing bailout funding that should have trickled my way. The debris of my American dream weighed on my psyche. My migraines are a type of scar from the time I tightrope walked a financial depression that we learned to call a recession in 2008. And I paid high interest rates on loans to survive it. This telling of my individual debt is not the sum of my life. The story of debt in America is oceans deep. In a system that favors what Dr. Noliwe Rooks refers to as segronomics, a system that ignores the business of profiting specifically from high levels of racial and economic segregation, this segronomic housing market system, individual debt calculation, deliberately ignores the transactions and profits gained when the same banks commodified, marketed, and benefited from the unpaid labor and deaths of my ancestors, African or otherwise. In this kind of system, the debt is legally my individual responsibility. Socially, the debt is reminiscent of the sum of crimes against humanity, like legally enslaving people for generations and enforcing this bondage with extreme violences and daft public policy. Today, the first thing I search for in any new place is Bermuda grass, the African grass that came to this country in the hay or in the heads of the commodified, imported, and enslaved African people. It is all swirled up in the lawns and the legacies of this new world. The people and the land have a similar admixture, a blending of racial and ethnic diversity, but few will admit it. Some histories hide in plain lies. This is true of new places. This is true of America. Thank you for listening. I think I'll entertain questions now. Ms. Winter?
Hello, everyone. Thank you, DaMaris. That was wonderful.
Okay, people might need a breather. That's the first time I'm like reading this aloud, and I've just been talking about it maybe a month.
Wow, okay, so it's really new. Is there anything in particular that you'd like folks to consider when coming up with questions or feedback? Anything that's particularly important to you?
There isn't anything that's particularly important to me, and I will answer any and all questions. Shame and guilt are very useful. I mean, useless to me. They're just useful for other people. They don't really work on me. So I don't have too much of them.
Okay, understood. We can let folks marinate for a bit.
I know it was a lot because nobody was expecting to hear that. So if people need to decompress, I understand. Sometimes in my reading, I ask people to move around and just destabilize the energy, because again, a part of my reading is to create tension in the body.
Mm-hmm.
It's something I aim for as a writer. And if you have experienced that affect, you will need to destabilize your body in order to move forward. Because, that's the recalibrating that many marked bodies have to do in America after such assaults, right? Exactly. Whether microaggressions or more violent.
So I think question from Anongo.
Hi, Anongo.
Hi, I'm so sorry. I'm not on camera. I'm kind of a hot mess right now, but this was just everything. I'm vibrating right now. Thank you for the even the way that you paced this conversation. I think the way that you've created space for processing, I'm just I'm full of gratitude for that. I wondered if you could talk a little bit in terms of your process. Mm-hmm. Around how you think about the written context and the spoken context. So you had just mentioned, I'm just speaking this. It sounds like this is freshly articulated out loud, and how in your process you work between those different modes. As someone who's coming in from the rap songwriting space, I feel like I'm constantly, it's like, oh, this looks really dope. And then I rap it and it's like, okay, that wasn't as dope as I thought it was. But like I'm very curious in your process, how you think about speaking the thing and writing the thing, what comes first, and how does it all sort of unfold? Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Well, the first thing that has to happen, and I give myself full permission to do, is what I call like vomiting on the page. So just writing as much as I can, as deliberately free as I can, in any form, not stopping for grammatical mistakes or spellings or any type of errors, because I don't know, as somebody, again, who my creative process is interdisciplinary, but as somebody that knows that these words will eventually be mixed, right? Because I also go into an editing process that is much like DJing. So I know that these words that I put on the page, I'm going to spin them around like they're on turntables and make them other things anyway. So the more words I have, the better the product I have to sample and blend, right? So there can never be enough. So that process in the writing happens sporadically, and it can happen like days at a time. So I was working on much of what I read to you was probably a third of the first chapter of the book. In that first chapter, it took me longer than usual to draft out. It took me a couple of weeks, maybe close to a month. But sometimes in my writing process, I can draft in maybe 4 or 5 days. Then I let it cool. Then my revision process in Nango is intensive. I revise probably more than most people. I could, in poems and even in this writing, I can revise a minimum of like 12 times. And so the first couple of revisions are about picking out what's important. The next level of revision is structuring a story so that it's engaging and that the reader may be able to follow. And then comes what I think is the telling of the story. So something that hasn't happened with this first chapter yet is the way that I'm going to integrate digital archives into this chapter as I'm writing it as a finished product. For this book particularly, I want to write the memoir and then come back and deal with the telling, because the telling changes. Even with these slides that I shared today, I changed these slides about 7:45, 8 a.m. this morning because the images did not have the consistency that I appreciate. So I slept and I woke up and I changed them. In order to read this intense piece today, I have been practicing reading this piece out loud since about Friday or Saturday. So the next level to the piece is embodying the piece for performance that happens off of the page. And that is a different process that happens after revision. Does that answer your question, Anango?
Yes, thank you so much.
DaMaris, I have one from Professor Blaine, who's on the go right now and asked me to pose this for her. Could you tell us more about the archival research you're doing for this new project? It's wonderful to hear that you're engaging various archives on campus. I'm also curious to hear your thoughts on the silences of the archives. How do you navigate these silences? Here, I am thinking of the many ways that Black women's stories and voices are often missing or marginalized in traditional archives.
Okay, let me say first, in my initial project, I thought I would be working with some different archives that focused on suffrage and children. And this project was in the back of my head. It wasn't really to the forefront as of yet. A part of me telling this family memoir is I'm going to be talking about lesser known historical ties between the island of Bermuda that remains a colony of Great Britain and the United States. My mother is from Bermuda. My father is from the US. And the John Carter Brown Library, like the experience of being there, I haven't seen a larger holding of records of Bermuda, particularly of the colonial period, ever. And my aunt used to be the director of cultural affairs in Bermuda, right? So it's not like I couldn't find these things, right? And so it is that. But the archives also position me in a way that allow me to surreal and abstract and structure a positionality from an Afro-Atlantic space of the water. I'm less interested about geography that affirms American mythology, right? We know that the spaces we stand in were named before any of us arrived, right? And so to be beholden to those names is an ethical and intellectual conflict for me, even if it affirms my national identity and the way that I was raised and have come to know these places. So I've been enjoying the John Carter Brown Library more than any other place on campus. I've just been indulging in it. I was bragging on it this morning, and this is like something really, really nerdy, but not only am I reading books that were published in 1609 about Bermuda, but I can actually touch the artifacts. And that's a very rare thing that happens for researchers. I hope I answered the question. I think it was a two-part question, Dr. Blaine. What was the second part?
I can read it again. The first part of the question was, can you tell us more about the archival research you're doing? The second piece was, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on the silences of the archives. How do you navigate them, especially in terms of the ways many Black women's stories and voices are often missing or marginalized?
Oh, so yes, I am in the archives like it's a sandbox, but you know I'm a digital girl, so I play in there like it's the Matrix. And so when I get in there, I'm like slipping and sliding across the archives, throwing the archives up, watching them fall like snow. And then every once in a while, I'm reading the archive and I found a glitch in the matrix. So the glitch in the matrix for here is when I was reading a piece on Bermuda. They were talking about how Bermuda was uninhabited, no people were there. These men that were shipwrecked in Bermuda, they found Bermuda and it was 5 of them, and they left 3 of the guys there, and the 3 of the guys got fat and they just ate and ate and ate, and they never even got sick. And the story goes on and on about how these men are surviving. And then all of a sudden it says, and 2 children were born on the island. And that's my glitch in the matrix. Who was wearing the vagina? I need an explanation. Where are the wombs? If you said no one lived here, if you said these 3 men were here alone, even if someone happened to be intersex or happened to have multiple genitalia and reproductive parts, I still need to know who was talented enough to help with that birth and keep that person alive. That is important, right? And so that is the glitch in the matrix for me. That is where the story is for me. And so now I'm in that wormhole and I'm not coming out. I'm 10 galaxies away with those 2 children that were born on that island to an unnamed mother and born, let the archive tell it, of an ungendered, unraced person, or poofed out of fresh air, right? So in my mind, I'm 10 galaxies away, holding the children's hands, looking for their mother.
Looks like we have time for one more. Professor Kwashi, would you like to jump in?
Hi, Professor Kwashi. I quoted you too.
Oh, you're so, DaMaris, that was so fantastic. Thank you so much. I want to ask you, I want to at some point, but maybe not today, to ask you if you would say more about the way time and space, including the seafloor, is part of your trying to conceptualize the language to do this in. And I say this in concert with the opening piece that you read. And you might want to take up that question right now, given what you just said about geography. But the other thing I wondered if you would talk about is, if you'd say something about this move from a collection of poetry to a memoir. And I don't mean to suggest that the move is a huge one for you. Anyone who knows your work recognizes the way in which memoir and historian manifests in your poetry. I was just so struck by how deliberately you used poetics in the piece you read, how much beautiful repetition there is in August, a September, an October and a November, and then you say that again. And so there is something about you thinking about the praxis of memoir that has in it these poetic features. And I just wondered if you would say something about how you are understanding that shift. Sorry for two wordy questions. I'm in it with you. This is fantastic. We're so lucky that you were able to present this to us.
Thank you so much. So one of the gifts that poetry has given me, and that philosophically and intellectually I have been able to capitalize on, is that poetry was probably the first practice that taught me to collapse time. Even as a child, I was very frustrated by concepts of like linear time and concepts associated with the body and limited spacing, right? Because somewhere early in my childhood, I was like, you know, this doesn't work for me. My mind can be anywhere. Why can't the rest of my body follow? Why is it that my consciousness can exist in multiple places at a time and my body cannot? And then when I try to have these conversations with adults, they try to really limit these conversations with me, most likely because people in my family were very afraid that I would be diagnosed with schizophrenia as another family member had been diagnosed. So when I had questions about why my consciousness and my body could not, why my body could not transcend in the same way that consciousness did, that was not a question that was going to be entertained lightly, if at all, right? It wasn't going to be entertained at all. But poetry gave me a means of kind of exercising that collapse of time, because linear time is a fiction, in my opinion, in itself. It's a practical fiction. It's a fiction that we reinforce with our daily lives and actions. So in that way, it becomes a kind of like connotative truth, right? But for me, it's still not real. Time, for me, time is at best a double-strand DNA, but really it's more circular and probably has dimensions much like a snowflake. And poetry allows me to exercise that philosophy in a written way. When it comes to memoir, what I'm doing with this repetition is I'm playing with the double helix of memory that chases, influences, pushes, guides, and destabilizes what we think of as linear time and space. Even if circular time didn't exist, memory would always be the defensive end running into the quarterback of linear time. And it is memory that informs our choices, that informs the way that we negotiate time, space, and power on this plane. And so with the repetition of the months, what I'm trying to do is induce that type of tension, right? That type of stress that became a squealing migraine on my head, right? So creating that line of months, it almost becomes a dagger of urgency in the work. I hope that answered your question, Dr. Kwashi. I may have left something out. Your question was very layered.
Looks like you've got some kudos in the chat from Professor Kwashi, but DaMaris, this was so wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and your work and all that you've learned in the process. We can't wait to see where this goes. And I hope that the folks assembled will join us for the next few WITANs that we've got coming up the rest of the semester. But huge thanks to you, DaMaris, for sharing your time with us.
Thank you so much. And thank you for everyone who attended. I appreciate you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank
you.
Bye, everyone. It's gonna stop the recording.
Okay.